Now, what I'm going to talk about is more about costing a study. So, assuming that you're going to have, funding from the PASF and you want to now doing some, apart from the research. And one of the things that a lot of people did actually not leaving a lot of time or leaving it far too last minute is about the costing of the study that you're intended to do. Now, so I'm just going to give you some general sort of like considerations, what you need to do. So this is basically is something that, throughout the years of experience I have when I was doing costing of trials or costing of studies. So it's just to make sure that, this is a kind of I call it my experience or a bit of a sort of like slight wisdom that I can actually pass it over to you when you costing your study as well. So the most important thing, as Melissa mentioned, is that you do actually need to make sure that you read the guidance of the funding stream that you're going for. What is the funding limit? And one of the quicker thing is you have to sort of like have an overview of your study and then to see whether your study will be able to deliver within that funding limit. If not, then you might actually need to think about going somewhere else. So this is actually is quite a good indicator is whether that's the right funding stream for you when you think that you want to do a big trials, and maybe the RFPB might not be the best fit for it. So that's something that you could probably consider. And you have to think about what they fund and what they don't fund. I mean, NIHR has a lot of funding streams, and they quite different in some sense as well. So I think one which is a much easier to sort of like separate out is the funding for research and the funding for fellowship. So you will probably, as Melissa mentioned, that funding for your PASAF was probably that you can put in some funding for training, etc. And that's also the case for fellowship, but it might not be entirely the case for if you're funding for a research that you think that this is going to be something that you can have a personal development. But it's not entirely that you can't have it. So, for example, if you're going into the social care, then they do actually want you to put some funding for capacity building. So it's good to read the guidance and see what it needs as well. Overheads mentioned already, and sometimes they're 100% and sometimes they are from your institution or they fund like the HTA, but there are other ones that they probably might only have they have no overheads, or they have a very restricted overheads, and that's something again that you need to bear that in mind. The other thing is Melissa also already mentioned is about contacting your finance as early as possible, because that is really important. You need to know what is your internal deadline, so you need to work backward when you need to have at least a draft of your application, a good ready to go, but there might be a final tweak but one of the most important thing is that you do actually need to have your costing everything ready for your internal deadline, because this is what your institution will make sure your funding, your application is all matched before they can sign off. So the signed off, again, whether you will also have another level in your, say that your department needs to sign it off before the research services in the institution that needs to sign off. So all that you need to make sure that you have a good preparation. I would say that the best thing to do is, first of all, is contact your finance first and give them a heads up, and this is coming and this is important. I know that there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, because if you haven't got the research project right, then it's quite difficult to think about what the cost is going to be. And I think that is something that you probably need to work in parallel. I think for me as a statistician, majority of the time people rely on what is your sample size, so that you know what would be the cost for per participant, or the general cost for the research is going to be, and that's always something that we do actually need to sort of like provide that information to them as soon as possible. So, but I think identifying the deadline is important, because you don't want to start tearing your hair out if you realize that you don't have the time. And the next thing is, if you're going to have collaborators, you're going to have co-applicants, again, make sure that you contact them ASAP about their costing, because their costing needs to come to your costing center, your cost center, to make sure that everything adds up. Okay. And if you have a clinical trials unit, or if you have a data providers, for example, the NHS England, and the other vendors, for example, a laboratory. So all these all needs to be making sure that you need to also contact them ASAP to make sure that you would actually get a good information from them. And that will also link to, you know, whether it's going to exceed funding limit. So don't worry to do sort of like the first round, you know, what is it going to be like? And then there will be a few iteration of it to make sure that everything is going to fit, and there's going to be some negotiation that needs to go in there as well. For me, when I have to provide information to the finance, I always give them the title of the project, the start date, the duration of the study, and also the web link of the funding call as well, so that your finance will be able to get everything ready. And even what I call it is open up a cost project code for you, so that you'll be able to work on it. There's always a balance between, you know, what is nice to have and what you need to have to deliver your research. What is affordable, and whether, you know, you're actually making it too lean that you're not going to be able to deliver. So these are the things that you will also need to think about. I think sometimes it's actually easier than said, and a lot of people might be saying to you that, oh, you know, especially the collaborator, and ask you for, you know, how much they can spend. You know, how it's basically, you need to calculate how much time you think that that person practically will be able to involve in the project. And then you'll probably have to, it's a skill, you know, to tell them that, you know, that would be what we will be able to afford to put you on as a co-investigator, etc. So these are the things that you probably need to think about more in the sort of like a bigger picture in general. Now, we always talk about, and funders always talk about, good value for money. And we sometimes always forget that good value for money, you know, means that it's cheap, but not necessarily that's what it is. You have to make sure that what you need can actually run your trial in a sort of like a very, or your research could be in a very sort of like high quality. And that's what is the realistic versus the competitiveness that you actually need to make sure. So you need to, what you don't want is, you don't want to have a study that you ended up going to be, your institution is going to be subsidizing, or you don't have any capacity of, if you need any more extension of your study. So I think these are the things that you probably need to aware of. Every single item of your cost will need to be justified, both staff and non-staff cost. What you want and what you need can be completely two different things. And we do, when I cost a study, we do actually go down to pretty much like how many tubes that you need per participant, or you know, how could we make things slightly cheaper in a way. But you know, there are times that you won't be able to. I think what you do actually need is the justification, and that's the most important thing. And then also open up sort of like a conversation with the funders about, you know, what is it that's actually can be affordable or not. Who is going to be responsible for what cost? For example, you've got the treatment cost, research cost, service support costs. So all these costs, you have to sort of like work out who would be actually what's contributed to what. So there is a bit of a one slice about the SOCAT, which is something that it would be the NHS cost that you probably can actually put that in. So the whole point is trying to make sure that you would be able to cost the trials that as reasonable as you can, competitive, but also it helps to make sure that you deliver your study. So staff cost, we talked about, there's a lot of staff could be involved in a study, or it could be just you. It depends. So you would cost for a chief investigator, and you have to be realistic because the chief investigator is the one, which is the main applicant, who basically is going to be not just running the study, but also running the whole projects as well. So you also have to take into account the project management side and for example, the costing, etc. So I think that they do not, if you're going to put yourself like 5%, 10%, it's not going to be very convincing. You're the one who would be able to deliver the whole project. So you have to be quite reasonable. And then, how much is going to be the co-applicants or the collaborators? Co-applicants are the ones that you usually need to cost it in, and collaborators might not be the ones that you need to cost it in. So, you need to sort of like start distinguish the teams, who would be the one who needs to be costed into your study. There's also you can actually think about the work package cost. So cost and split into work packages, or it's a whole program duration. Who is going to be, if you're going to have a group of people who are going to be just working on a specific work package, then you probably do not actually need them to be included in the full duration of the study, and that's how you can make your study cheaper, to make sure. But there will be some core people in your study that you will probably want them to be there in the entire duration of your project. So that's something that you need to also be aware of. There are something called the directly incurred and directly allocated cost. I don't know, some people might sort of like not quite understand what they are, and I did actually struggle initially, but it does actually means that how you're going to put that cost would depending on how it would be audited at the end of the day. Yes, do bear in mind that if you're the very lucky or unlucky one that your study get audited, then that's where everything has to be sort of like be very much well monitored. So the directly incurred costs are project specific and identifiable as sort of like from a conduct of a research. So it's pretty much that you would expect that there might be a named person, or it would be directly to that person, to a specific person, and it must be able to have all the information there, all the payment, and it must be auditable for that project level. So the directly allocated costs are sort of like slightly bit not project specific. So it could be a shared, so it could be a sort of like for specific and a non-named person could be on it. I think this is slightly less of a problem with NIHR funding, but I know that if Wellcome Trust does actually make a quite clear distinction between the two. From my experience. So there are costs of other staff, so for you have to think about the cost for an observational study. If you're doing a clinical trial, do actually talk to a CTU. A cost for a trial that doesn't require a regulatory authority approval versus the ones that do would be quite different, and that actually could actually be one of the biggest costs of your of the whole grant that you're going to be put in. So just to make sure that you're aware of that, and do talk to a CTU. They do actually have experts in that area and tell you what they need, etc. The cost for laboratory, who is going to be doing the analysis, whether it's going to be done via the NHS usual care route or not, and the who is going to be handling the sampling, the samples. These are sort of like the admin and also support costs. So these are the things that you need to really make sure. So I call them, these are staff costs, because it's somebody who is actually going to be responsible doing the work. The public involvement, patient and public involvement, is one that you have to make sure there is a good appropriate costing for that, in terms of how much time they would be attending to a meeting, the time that they would be used for any sort of like small consultations, or anything that's also the cost for them to be reviewing documents, etc. So I tend to, for a sort of like a very substantive PPI, I do actually put in a good percentage of FTE for that person, because you will realize that it does actually, that person could actually do a lot more than you think. There's another one that I actually put in the last bit is whether it is a sort of like a full, it's the FTE, the full time equivalent, that is somebody that you're buying a percentage of time, or it's an hourly rate that you actually need to remember. Because if it's an FTE, then that person might actually have the overheads contributed to it. If it's an hourly rate, then that person might not be under the staff cost. It could actually be under the non-staff cost because it could be a consultant. So that's the kind of things that you will probably also need to think about. So for me, I usually put in, say, FTE. For example, if I say somebody who's 10% of an FTE, that means I would expect that person who is going to be contributed half a day a week to get involved, to at least going to be working on your projects, etc. So that's something that you probably, it's quite a good way to, if you want to do some negotiation with people, then they know that where you come from with all these FTE that you put in. So non-staff cost, there's a lot, but these are all examples. Make sure you make a list, and every single item would probably also need to have a justification attached to it. So you can't just sort of like throw it in, £20,000 for a database. So these are sort of like, you need to say why it actually needs to cost this much. And, it breakdowns in different years as well. And licenses, laptop is pretty much standard. Licenses, do make sure, a lot of people completely forgotten that the statisticians maybe using the software do actually also need to put the cost in. We did actually had a query back about a cost that we put in, and they ask pretty much exactly, how every single license per year is cost, etc. And then the proms, that is always the one that a lot of people tends to forget. Because they thought that they can just pull that from an internet and use it, but not really. Some of the ones that actually require licensing, so you've got to make sure you've got to pay for those as well. And some of the ones are very sort of like non-specific, and some of the ones are maybe more specific to, say, trials. But I think that I'm giving you the list, and hopefully you would have this list that's actually important, that that it's something that you need to consider. There might be more for whatever trials or studies that you're working on. One of the things that you also need to be aware of is the dissemination and communication costs. Some people sometimes just put a very nominal amount of it, but thinking about your PPI, thinking about the people, especially if you want to promote your study, make sure that you put some costing in. Translation is very important, and the cost for translation vary a lot as well, and you have to think about how many translation that you need to do and how many languages. It could be just down to as detailed as that you would need to make sure that you've got some cost allocated to them. The data providers, participant cost is how much that you would pay for say a participant to take part. And again, the reason why you might want to sort of like pay them is mainly because that will help to improve retention. And it's not going to be like a lot of money, but it's going to be something which is an incentive for them. There's costs for the NHS England, and that again, having an early discussion with your data provider would be really good. So when it comes to non-staff costs, especially when it comes to, say, collaboration, make sure that avoid any duplications, with the different teams. And that happened to us before, that it comes up with a very large amount of money, realizing that there's two parties actually costing something, the same. So avoid too much guessing. It's not going to help, because everything needs to be justified to the penny. Are there any alternative option that can keep the cost down? For example, electronic data capture, but you have to think about whether it's feasible, because even though that you need time for the data entry, etc., but costing to build a database might be more. So that's something that you need to take a balance. And then the consumables, telephone, printing, postage, service. These are the ones that some of the NIHR funding stream actually refuse to pay now. So they think that these are all under the overheads. And that is something that, again, you need to justify. So this is the SOLCAT, which for some of the trials that you probably need to do, especially as a tool, just to make sure that you know it's a tool that we use for non-commercial research studies in the UK. So for all the 14 devolved nations, we'll have to submit this, and it's important because it breaks down, what are the costs that contributed to running your research sites, and what is it that's actually going to be for the excess treatment costs, etc. And there is quite a big, long web page on the NIHR website that actually explain more about this and explain about the, who you need to contact, etc. So, but it is important. I just want to make a point. It's important that you do actually need to do a SOLCAT if involving any of the NHS patients. And there's going to be the RDN as well. And I think that some of the research, some of the funding stream, like the NIHR, do actually expect you to have a SOLCAT. So this is, again, something that it might take a while. If you're doing a trial, then your trials unit might able to also help you with that as well. Yeah. So in summary, costing do actually plays quite a big part in your application, and to make sure that you do need to give yourself enough time, a lot of time for that. And the first step to demonstrate that your skill as a lead as well, and how good you are, doing your costing, managing your research costs, etc. And it does actually require some iteration and negotiation, which is already what I've said already before. But give yourself some leeway, but have to be quite sensible. And knowing that there's a lot of times now the NIHR might not fund any study extension, so you do actually need to think about, there might you need to give yourself slightly a bit wiggle room to make sure that you've got enough money that takes you through, just in case there's something that's unexpected to come up. But it has to be quite sensible because you need to justify that as well.